In this next segment, we're going to talk a bit about styles and how grinding, especially in longer games, in long end games, can be effective against other grinders as well. Often, they're used to the shoe being on the other foot. They're used to being the one putting pressure on with the long-term small advantages. But if you take the small, long-term strategic advantages from them, then they often struggle. So join us in a moment for an instructive game. A key part of chess is understanding not just your own strengths, but also your opponent's style as well. And from time to time, you might find yourself facing another player who likes to grind, who likes these long endgames. And the next example is one of my favorite grinds personally. It was one of my games against Pintala Harikrishna, a strong Indian grandmaster and someone who likes to kind of draw out games and look for chances a bit later on. And Magnus, you were present for this game as well.
Yeah, I was. I believe I made a fairly quick draw as black against Wojtaszek. I couldn't really do much in that game. And as usual, your game was the last one for our team. So I was just there watching till the end, cheering you on, and getting nervous every time you were down on the clock. But the game in itself was really instructive.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, we should mention we were playing for a Norwegian team, Vålerenga, and we came so close to winning the European Club Cup, one match away.
We did.
And in this current game, we were playing one of the favourites, one of the top-seeded teams. So going into this game, I had an opening choice to make. I play a few different opening first moves as well, and I decided to go for something a bit safer, the Reti. Underrated, and it did transpose, however, into one of the main lines of the Catalan. So we'll race ahead. We won't get into too much detail here. And at this point, White has lots of moves. White has Queen A4, White has Knight E5, White has Knight A3, a whole bunch of moves. Instead, I decided my opponent's a grinder, but this time he's going to be on the wrong side of a grind. I decided to get the queens off, and the type of position that we reach.
Let me just quickly mention that I actually beat Hari in the World Blitz as well earlier, I think in 2017, with this line Knight F to Deep 2 at this point.
That was part of my preparation.
Yeah, and I also ground him down in an endgame there, but that line is essentially a draw. So Knight B2, D2 as you played is, for a good reason, the main line.
Yeah, but that's interesting. I think, I vaguely recall seeing that game when I was preparing for my opponent in this one, and I think it was just that realization that maybe he didn't like these types of positions, or maybe he wasn't so comfortable being on the slightly worse end of things. And here, there's the modern approach that's only really started happening in the last year is for black to play Rook F to C8. But at the time, Rook F to D8 was the main move. And I prepared, after some exchanges, another move that's known, but maybe a bit more rare. And this forced my opponent to think, instead of, for example, exchanging the rooks and allowing a position such as this one, where black's trying to kind of neutralize my bishop, I decided, okay, instead of all these exchanges, to go back with my rook. And we mentioned it was a team event. Part of my thinking was influenced by the fact it was a team event, minimal risk here for White. And when you're facing other grinders, Magnus, do you have a specific approach? Would you go for something like this? Or another way, I guess, is to go more direct against them?
Yeah, I really would depend on both my mood and what lines I had prep in and so on. But in general, I wouldn't be hesitant to play these slightly better or even equal positions against fellow grinders, because a lot of people they like playing for a win in slightly better positions. Most people don't like defending them.
Yeah, that's true. And I've noticed, especially as players get a bit older, they lack a bit of patience for defending these kind of long positions. I think a year or so after this game, I managed to defeat Michael Adams from the same position. A notable grindmaster himself.
Yeah, I've beaten Mickey in a lot of endings myself, so I can attest to that.
He's a master in eking out the small advantages, but yeah, sometimes he gets a bit impatient.
Yeah.
He doesn't enjoy defending them. So, okay, here my opponent didn't want to exchange rooks. Suddenly, white's central pawns have a bit of potential.
Yeah.
And instead, he offered an exchange. But now,
and it's worth mentioning in the other line that you don't have real hanging pawns yet on c4 and d4. You can keep the pawn on d3, protecting each other, and then only later you can consider going d4 and more actively. And this is just a much better position for whites.
Yeah, and this is pretty much. Not this exact move order, but the structure. This is what I got against Michael Adams, and later there are plans of pushing this pawn forward. And the bishop pair here, lovely long-term factor. So, okay, instead of this, he jumped forward and exchanged here. And what I was banking on him not knowing is that black has some forcing ways to play the position. Black can play a5, for example, which is maybe counterintuitive.
Yeah,
creating some weaknesses, and that's the type of thing I always look for in openings. I guess you too, where your opponent has a path, but it's not maybe natural.
Yeah, especially in such a situation where draw is not a disaster. Make him prove it. If he knows the line perfectly, then well, congrats.
Yeah,
exactly. Move on.
Yeah, and a5. There's actually a lot more details here. We reach some positions that white has a small advantage with minimal risk. But instead, he dropped back, and now suddenly I stabilize, and especially against grinders, they don't like when it's stabilized.
Crucially, you've gained a couple of tempi on the other line.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I have an isolated pawn, but that line you mentioned, where black can try and trade off his bishops, it's a pipe dream now.
It's still super solid for black, so it's not a big deal, but the opening has been a clear success for you.
Yeah, and now I was feeling very happy. Team tournaments, no risk. But turning this into something more concrete, more tangible, that's the hard part. So we see a maneuvering phase. I just started to bring the king. It's an endgame, I guess, why not? I wasn't sure.
I can see, by the way, so if we go a couple of moves back, like, I sometimes lack the extreme patience that you have. So I would be tempted to make this move here, just to grab space immediately. What was your thinking here? I'm not at all sure it's a good move. For instance, knight e7 is an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I remember analyzing this afterwards, and at some point, computers really approve of pushing pawns forward like this. Yeah. I think so early, it might be an idea like this one where c4 is attacked. I'm gonna have to spend a move defending it. I'm not sure exactly how. If I move my bishop, for example, maybe they're better squares, but then black does get his bishop.
Yeah, this would not be ideal. No. Also, what did you think about f3?
In this position?
Yeah,
f3.
And then your king would be a little more active. But I guess your thinking is, I can spend a little more time, my advantage is not going to go away, and I can just give him a few more choices.
Yeah, I think that was my my rationale at the time. And like you said, extreme patience. Sometimes it's a curse, sometimes I miss the moment, but here I felt it was justified just because black doesn't have a concrete way of really doing too much.
Yeah.
So actually, okay, I played bishop d2 first, just so that there's no tempo gaining moves against this pawn.
Well, there's knight e5, but then c5 looks very good.
Yeah, c5.
And all these exchanges, don't be fooled into, I mean, we've discussed similar positions before, but don't be fooled into thinking that this is a clear draw. Yeah. With the bishop pair, this is plenty of material to create a lot of practical and also probably objective difficulties for black, and
clear target as well.
Yeah, there's a clear target, and yeah, I wouldn't be convinced at all that I could draw this as black.
Yeah, I mean, this is my ultimate fantasy, this type of position where white can just, again, no risk, play. Yeah. I mean, without these pawns, draw, but with them on the board.
And crucially, not even potential exchange of bishops alleviates all the difficulties for black. Here, I think there are choices, but you could, for instance, just go bishop c3, and here, there's, I mean, also bishop e5 to be honest, but just take on g2, and Black's problems are not gone, since the bishop is so much better than the knight on an open board.
Yeah, this bishop is a key piece, and also if the knight moves, for example, somewhere, white's king is much quicker to get into the center than its counterpart. So, yeah, all these sorts of things, I guess my opponent had to weigh up. And if we go back to the game, this pawn not really a weakness, maybe stepping forward at some point. I think, I mean, you mentioned this extreme patience with king f1. The only thing that stops me, firstly, there are other tempting moves pushing this pawn, but I was always calculating whether to play this move. And here it's a bit different. Black can block it up.
Yeah.
And it's just about whether to change the position, right? Potentially these two could become strong, although they are blockaded for now.
They could. So I guess unless you see a follow up, you can do it later. I suspect you keep some advantage here as well.
Yeah.
But
you just love these for white, but often the plans are less
yeah,
straightforward.
they're a bit iffy sometimes.
Yeah. So non-committal. I could already tell. I mean, I was spending a lot of time over the next few moves just trying to come up with a plan, but my opponent, he was a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
As well. And okay, we've improved to the maximum. I decided, okay, no need to rush. I'm building up for this type of idea, pushing all the pawns forward.
Very typical plan with the bishop there.
Yeah, you can play on both sides, right?
Yeah.
Gaining space, getting ready for a pawn race. And if we fast forward a bit more, my opponent was just maneuvering around again, no clear plan for black, and e5. And yeah, I mean, pawn structures are a massive thing, right, in any endgame. Here, there's a couple of choices for white. I decided to block it just because I knew the game would drag on a bit longer. I thought this would worsen black's pieces, but how do you make these judgments when it's not clear the pawn structure is what you should be aiming for? Because at least to me, it wasn't clear here.
Yeah, it's very difficult in this case. Like, intuitively, I would feel that putting the pawns on dark squares, and maybe even gaining some more footholds for your pieces, this would be favorable for black. But on the other hand, were the position ever to open up, you do acquire a clear target on g7 and a lot of space, as well as a square for the bishop or even the knight on e4. So it's not clear to me who this favors. You could, of course, keep the tension with e3. Not, I think, particularly worrying about moves like f5, because you just drop back with the bishop. But then you would have to find a follow-up as well, and it's not clear that you want to take away this e3 square from a bishop. So who knows?
Yeah, and I decided to push forward after much thought, and okay, a bit more maneuvering here. I decided I needed to keep the bishop pair, at least for now. And after a few more moves, we saw my opponent finally try to get active, and I could tell he'd been itching to do something all game, just, again, body language-wise, just from his long thoughts on all the maneuvers, but still not much for black. And he decided to come in. I just dropped back, kicking him out. If the bishop captures this pawn, then I think we can just trap it. But for example, the rook moves and we trap this bishop.
Make it as easy as possible.
Yes, and just getting all the pieces off the board. So instead, he had to drop back. And
was there an option of going knight e4 there?
In this position.
Yeah,
and I think you mentioned this.
Oh, yeah, we talked about this, and then takes the knight e3, right?
Yeah, we weren't so sure.
We were not so sure about this. Bishop to b7, let's say. Knight h5. So knight c6, there's knight g7, takes e6.
Yeah. And this was the stuff I remember vaguely calculating. Gain time, so there's no time to take our bishop on b4. And I guess, I think actually part of the reason I did decide to drop back in this position with the knight, firstly I'm trying to improve it, bring it this way, maybe, but I wanted to give him the options. Maybe black has a concrete way here of forcing it, but it's going to cost him a lot of time calculating, evaluating. And I remember you watching this game. What was going through your mind? Just were you calculating these lines as well? Yeah,
I think I was. I don't remember precisely what I was thinking, but definitely the game became quite a bit more concrete here. It's not ideal considering that there are 3 moves to go to the time control and you had little time.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember it was around here that I think it was on move 40 itself. I was slightly panicking here. I wasn't sure, maybe knight e3, but now the knight's gone in that direction. Maybe now there's a check. You mentioned this idea, and if the white king moves, sometimes black can think of coming in this way. Sometimes the knight goes back this way.
Yeah. Feels like black has improved his pieces quite a lot.
More active now.
Actually, after knight c6, I would be quite, I wouldn't say tempted, but I would seriously considering just chopping off the knight on d6 and then going c5.
Yeah, getting rid of white's only weakness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just
that seems to me that you still have a serious initiative as the knight is going to h5.
Yeah.
And this is I would say, a fairly typical transformation of advantages.
Yeah, and I mean, we mentioned that move 40, so just before extra time gets added on, and I found actually I've made a lot of good decisions just before move 40, not breaking the tension, but I've also made a lot of bad decisions around move 40 because I want to keep things. I don't want to commit when I only have 1 or 2 minutes on the clock. And do you have any advice there? I mean, I guess you try not to get in time trouble. That's the first step, but it's inevitable sometimes.
Yeah, I think you shouldn't have guidelines. You should just try and evaluate each position concretely. And as you will see in another chapter, sometimes it's important to spend all the time you have. Let's say you have half a minute. Spend the minute. You're getting more time.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I think you're right there. What I do, I find a big mistake of mine is I just keep tension for the sake of keeping tension.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily do that. Sometimes you have to go for something concrete, whether it's a line like this one where the nature of the play changes, or whether it's a direct tactic, even low on time. So if we backtrack, I didn't make those exchanges after knight c6. I dropped back. And finally now I push my pawn forward. I was just hoping to keep the bishop there, get a similar thing. And yeah, here I think he does have a concrete way to solve his problems, black, but with 1 minute on the clock, or roughly that, it's not easy to find this knight into c4, attacking the bishop. And for example, if the bishop moves, then he can just exchange everything off. And yeah, this bishop is actually on a really, really bad square.
Yeah.
So
this is one of the points of attack or exchanging on d6. You kind of reduce this activity quite a lot while still keeping some significant positional trumps.
Yeah, and if he played a line like this, firstly, hats off to him with 1 minute on the clock, not easy, but then I might have lived to regret all those slow maneuvers. So double-edged sword, that one. Okay, and around here, there were some really interesting tactics. I remember you mentioned to me after the game, I think it was in this position. Okay, I started kicking his knight around. His knights are doing a lot of dancing, more maneuvers.
Yeah, now it's starting to look pretty nice again.
Yeah, the problem is every time my knight goes this way, he just defends it with his king. And suddenly he does have some concrete threats. So it looks nice for white, but I wasn't sure how to press the advantage. Again, I guess you'd be calculating here purely. It's still, we've done all the maneuvering. That phase is done. What's the next phase? And okay, I played this bishop a6, and I did have a trick in mind. So, for example, if he removes this rook, this is
I remember this. I mentioned this, no?
Yeah, you mentioned after the game. So it's stuck in my mind. Some tactics. For example, white can push this pawn forward. It looks like we're just kicking this bishop, maybe even to a better square. He can grab a pawn, but you mentioned this one.
Yeah,
I guess
CB.
CB.
And then takes.
Not taking this rook, ignoring it, and instead, or a rook down, but we make a queen. Yeah, check.
Can't stress this enough. Always look out for tactics.
Yeah, and actually, the game I mentioned earlier against Michael Adams, it was exactly this motif. Okay, the pawn was on the b file. It was promoting on b8, but he fell for this exact thing. He let me kind of open a file. He took my rook, but then I make a new queen. And this type of thing, I noticed, especially against grinders themselves, they hate it when there's small tactics that are working against them.
Yeah.
Well, at least I do. I feel super uncomfortable when I'm defending and the tactics aren't looking great. So, okay, here he made a good decision, I think. He dropped back with his bishop. And finally, after this, I didn't see a way to keep the bishop there. Knight e4. small trick, nasty check, but he just defends. And yeah, sometimes, I mean, you just come up against great defense and there's no way through, but it's just about keeping the pressure. And here I decided to exchange the bishops. And unfortunately now, after rook takes rook, this trick doesn't work because his rook can just come back and guard a8. But so instead I had to take, and I don't know about you, Magnus, I wasn't feeling too optimistic around here anymore.
No, but there's still quite a lot of play in the position, I think. His knights don't look great. G7 is still weak. B6 could be a little bit weak. So I remember, like, when watching this game, I was more worried about your time than the position.
Yeah, actually, that's one of my my techniques. I make my opponent focus more on the clock, and they forget about the board sometimes, or they try to punish me for the lack of time. And I think I also remember you saying after this game that I played much better with 1 minute on my clock than I do with 2 hours on my clock. Yeah. And I wish it wasn't true, but it probably is. So yeah, in this position, I remember not feeling optimistic because I realized that it's very concrete now, and his king is quick to get into the game. But as you mentioned, there's enough material left to at least ask some questions. And the key for this whole game, I felt, and team chess in general, when having white, is the less risk, the better. And still no risk. So the bishop comes to a nice diagonal. I wanted to push this pawn forward, but I envisaged, I think there are lines where, black can maneuver his knight, but at some point he brings his king, pushes a pawn, swaps things off. He has to be a bit careful, but maybe that was a better bet. Instead, bishop a3. And now at least he puts his pawn on a light square. And I thought he was almost in zugzwang here, I've got to admit. For example, if the king comes out, the bishop goes back and picks up some pawns. This was a target you mentioned earlier. If the black knight moves, then there's some knight checks. But he does have this one move to keep the game going, gaining time. And he's just in time to hold things together. If king c4, king c6, he holds his ground. So I thought, okay, just ask another question.
No, it's time to finally try and win that cheap pawn.
Yeah. 2 targets here, I guess, still. This g7 pawn, b4 for now is well protected and hard to get at. So I went round. And, he gave a check. And yeah, I guess it's here you said you started to get a bit nervous about the clock because my king's open to a few checks. Open to a few knight forks. Yeah, knight forks in time trouble. Oof.
Yeah.
Scary. But, here I just had to trust my instinct and I decided, okay, now is the time to push forward. And I mean, I'm not 100% sure how much I'd calculated here. I'd kind of seen what was about to happen in the game. But it's all about just trying to kick his pieces away. Again, difficult question for black.
I remember looking at this position during the game, and I didn't think it was hopeless.
You mean in terms of playing for a win?
Yeah. For instance, knight f4,
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be the best move. I remember I saw this position. I remember I wanted bishop c1. That's why it's trying to play for domination. If you take on h3, it's bishop e3.
Yeah, and this is a common pattern. The black knight a bit stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think black should take on h3 now. But if not that, what else? Yeah, if the black knight jumps in, I guess maybe we can take an f4, but we just move again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not hopeless. Computers, I think, do defend this, but
that's
the point. Besides the point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so still some ideas. Instead, he did make a mistake here, and I think even maybe the decisive mistake, he jumped in with a check. Very natural, but again, I could tell he wasn't so comfortable, and here he had missed it.
Yeah, this is a nice maneuver in a sense. Going for that pawn on e4, but indeed, now you just have enough.
Yeah, and it's all about actually the targets and the quality of them, right, I guess, because me getting g7 is much more important than losing e4, at least while my king is nearby. And I think this is the one he'd missed. Bishop a3, knight f2, I move the king, attacking his knight, and now if everything comes off, then This is the sting in the tail. Still some calculation to be done here, but white will win a pawn.
So you can go with the knight to e8, but that then there are lines, but they generally just show the superiority of the bishop over the knight.
Sorry, you mean in this position, right?
Yeah.
Knight check. This is a draw, I guess. Or maybe even...
No, it's a draw.
Yeah, probably a draw. Black has this very strong passed pawn, protected passed pawn. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm not sure exactly where the king should go, but ugly piece. Should be winning for white.
Yeah, I think it's fairly easy.
This pawn should win the day. So yeah, bit of domination there for the pieces. After bishop a3, knight f2, he instead went back this way to guard f8. And yeah, again, another comment I remember of yours, you said this was the key one, keeping this pawn alive. And I'm not sure, I mean, I think it was my first instinct, but then I paused for some reason.
I think it was just, I think there were two things. First of all, g7 is falling, so you don't have to worry about that. You can go grab that pawn at any time. But I think it was just about two things. Displacing his knight a bit and also keeping more pawns on the board. And it's just remarkable how helpless it is after this.
Maybe it's the quality of the pawn as well. This promotes on a dark square in an endgame. Maybe it's more important to keep alive. And yeah, you mentioned the helplessness there, Magnus, knight takes g4. And I think this is the move maybe I was most proud of in the game, rather than rushing ahead with anything. Just king back to d3 and suddenly, as you mentioned, this knight is stuck. Can't really get back to a good square, and this knight stuck defending f8.
That's kind of move I love myself.
Yeah.
Just keeping control, playing for domination.
That's the grinder's heart, right?
Yeah. No, this is a beautiful position. Yeah. The bishop is kind of perfectly placed. The knight as well jumping in, and now the king just goes over to dominate the knight in g4. And there's very little he can do.
Yeah, white's king just walks over, and okay, he gave the check. I repeated the position just because...
You got one down to 1 second, I think.
Probably, knowing me. I just wanted to get to that magical 100 move mark. But here I just realized, okay, I didn't need to repeat, kick his knight to a worse square. And now it's time to go for the pawn. And I mean...
There are enough pawns on the board in general, so that even with this knight exchange, you can still win pretty easily.
Yeah, the only thing we have to watch out for, right, is all the kingside pawns disappearing, and... I mean, the white A pawn promotes on the wrong color square, so that's the only trick. But it's not enough for black.
Let's say black goes g5, then I guess you just take knight e5, king f4, and king g4.
Yes.
And he's not going to get rid of both of those pawns on the king side.
Yeah, I mean, both of his pawns, meanwhile, are going to fall to the white bishop. So yeah, instead he tried one final attempt. He put his pawn on a light square, makes sense, and he went active, but luckily this bishop has enough squares. Worst comes to worst, it can often hide in the corner on h8, and knights are terrible at stopping these rook's pawns. So the rest of the game was quite straightforward, just to show the winning blow. Okay, I protected things. King and pawn endgames are winning for white, because the black king is too far away. This f pawn will promote. So here, the final breakthrough was just to, repeating the position again, the final blow was to give up the bishop, allowing a knight check, but these pawns win the game. So yeah, I mean, I was pretty proud of this, and looking back, it's maybe one of the better games I've played in my career, but I just felt it was more about the strategy, the preparation, finding a position he wasn't so comfortable with, and that can be the key sometimes. For
sure. And he didn't make a lot of obvious mistakes this whole game, but it's just unpleasant when you're constantly given choices that aren't very good, that may or may not lead to a draw, but you're never sure. So we've seen a lot of positions where you have very little to play for, but here you actually have something concrete. You do have the bishop pair, and although his position is super solid, there are no weaknesses. It's also hard to improve it, and all these transformations, they're usually favorable to the side with the bishop pair. So it was definitely a tough defense for him, and I think you found a lot of ideas there to make it as difficult for him as possible.
Thank you. But that's one way to play against other grinders. Grind them down. You can still do it. They often are uncomfortable when they're on the wrong side of things.